Shalom and welcome to the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. We're looking today at Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 25. You may recall in verse 24 that the Lord had been wishing his people would say, "Let us fear the Lord." He is the one who set the boundaries for the nations. And in verse 24, he is the one who gives us the rain that we need, the early rain and the latter rain. But that's not happening. And we're going to see part of the reason in this verse here. Pretty short verse, not very complicated. Let's go ahead and read it in Hebrew. Avonotekem hitu ele, v'chatotekem meneu, hatov mikem. So we start with this one. It looks like a long, complicated word, but it's really not. We have the word avon, pretty simple word, avon. And this is actually written here with a Cholam Vav. So this is the word for iniquity or sin. So this is a plural, avon, avonot. And then with this, with the yod here tells us we're adding this is for a plural suffix here. So this is a 2MP suffix. So it's your iniquities. And your iniquities, your sins, they have done something. Now this is the one tricky verb that we're going to have in this verse here. Hitu. Well, what do we have here? You'd almost have to make a guess unless you're familiar with it. And this is one of two words that's a little bit tricky in the Hebrew, but they're fairly frequent, so you can get used to them. All right, well, what do we have? We have a hit prefix at the very beginning. So that's going to tell us this is a hifil, not a preformative, but a prefix. We have an u at the ending. So this is going to tell us that we have probably going to have a perfect. It's going to be a third common plural. As I said, it's going to be a hifil. But, well, from what verb? Because if you take off the prefix and you take off the affirmative at the end, you're left with just a tate in the middle of it. Well, this is one of two verbs, and it's here we have the verb nata, and this one means to incline or to stretch out, and in the hifil it's going to mean to turn away, to thrust aside. The problem is that the nun at the beginning assimilates. That's the dagesh that you see there in the tate. The hey at the end drops off totally. So frequently all you're left with is just this one letter in the middle. Now I said there's two verbs that do that. The other verb that does that is the verb nakah, meaning to strike or to smite, and since they did a lot of smiting in the Old Testament, you often see that one as well. So those are two that are a little bit tricky, but you get used to seeing, especially nakah, but also the verb nata here. So your sins, your iniquities have thrust aside these. This is your plural demonstrative, your near demonstrative. Well, what's the these referring to? Well, in this context, going back to verse 24, it's probably referring to the rains, the early rains and the latter rains, the blessings that God has given to his people. And they've been turned aside because of their sins. And tekem, this here, hata, is the usual word for sin. So it's basically a synonym of avon, iniquity. So here it's your sins, plural, once again. And you see the holum carries, because you have the weak aleph, the holum carries all the way through to the plural ending tot, hatot, ekem. So it's your sins. And here we have a perfect and a third common plural, kal, from the verb mana. And that verb means to keep back or to withhold. So your sins have withheld the good. So you have the article plus the adjective good, but being used as a substantive here. The good, probably referring to the blessings, the good blessings of the rain, the these, which goes back to verse 24, which is the rains, have withheld the good from you. When God withholds rain from his people, that's a bad thing, because they need the rain, they want the rain, they appreciate the rain. As I mentioned before, maybe where you're living, the rain is not always a blessing to have a rainy day. I'm actually recording this from my home in Phoenix in the summertime, and it's 115 degrees out, and we would love to have some rain here. So it's a real blessing, and when it doesn't come, it can be devastating. So it's pretty simple in its analysis of this verse. Let's go ahead and hide our work here and look at three translations real quickly. The Tanakh, 1985, it is your iniquities that have diverted these things. Okay, that's pretty good. Turned aside, thrust aside these things. And your sins that have withheld the bounty, the good, from you. Very good translation. Not too much to say about that. New Jerusalem Bible, your misdeeds, for avon, iniquities, okay, that's okay, have upset all this, have thrust these things aside. All this referring to the blessings that God wanted to give to his people. Your sins have deprived you of these blessings, have withheld these things from you. Teeny bit of a paraphrase, but again, very good. The idea comes across very strongly. And one that I didn't particularly care for, and I wanted to point it out, is the New English Bible this time. But your wrongdoing has upset nature's order, and your sins have kept you from her kindly gifts. I think I know what they mean, because God is the one who has ordered nature. But by phrasing it this way, nature's order and her kindly gifts, it almost seems to me like the New English Bible is imposing this intermediate Mother Nature kind of concept in between God's blessing of his people and the fulfillment of that blessing with the rain falling. I didn't think that's necessary. I think you can see God's hand more directly involved with nature. So I understand what they're getting at, but I didn't care for that too much. I prefer something like what we get in one of the other main translations. God said, he had said in Deuteronomy, which Jeremiah was very familiar with, that this would be one of the consequences of God's people turning away from him. He would chasten them and punish them and correct them, using the forces of nature to do that. Here that's happening now, and he wants his people to come back and to listen to him. We'll check back with us soon as we continue working our way through Jeremiah chapter 5 in the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Shalom.